Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and welcome back to my channel Stubbornly Bookish. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up. Now June was a pretty successful reading month for me. I read 6 books in June and gave 3 of them 5 stars. 3 of these books I loved and adored to pieces and gave that elusive 5-star rating because man, this year has been a struggle. And if I'm not mistaken, I've only given one other book a 5-star rating this year, so I'm pretty thrilled. The first book I read in June was Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. This is a very nice, sweet, fluffy, female-female contemporary romance. It's about this young girl named Emmy who is incredibly passionate about film and set design, and at the start of her summer she is given the opportunity to live at her brother's apartment on the condition that she does something epic with it. It contained very healthy and uplifting friendships, a very sweet and well-developed romance. I thought it discussed matters of privilege incredibly well, and I actually think that this book is Own Voices, if I'm not mistaken. It kind of actually played by in my head as a movie would, which I think is a little ironic seeing as this book has very heavy focus on movie making. So much of this book just resonated with me and really connected, and it was just not something that I was expecting to love as much as I did. I will say that it was a little bit unrealistic in certain aspects of it, and I know that some people may not like it. I devoured it. I read it within days. It had me in tears with how beautiful I thought it was. I just can't recommend this one enough, especially if you're in the mood for some good YA contemporary. I highly recommend this one. I very obviously gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I just thought it was amazing. Forgot how hard it was to review books that you basically just loved everything about. It's difficult. The next book I read in June I actually listened to on audio, and it was Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli. This is the sequel / companion to Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, a book and movie in which I have just loved. I think this book has a lot going for it. It follows a fat, bisexual teen girl who is kind of trying to figure out her place in the world, but this book did end up falling a bit flat for me. I thought Leah at times could be an incredibly relatable teen girl. She makes mistakes, she is quite messy as a person, but other times she just goes too far with certain things. She's unwilling to bend or give, and it was an incredibly difficult trait to read from with your narrator. She's incredibly unreasonable a lot of the time. Unfortunately, this book isn't incredibly plotty. It basically focuses on Leah and her last few months of high school, but not much really happens. I actually really liked the progression of the romance. I do think it was a little bit quick, and I didn't love that it was at the expense of some other characters, but I thought it was very natural and not really forced in there. Frankly, I wasn't a fan of the whole everyone lives happily ever after kind of thing, and I wanted more from this book. I think that there could have been a lot more to this book, which is ultimately why I gave this 3.5 of 5 stars. The next book I read was also listened to on audio, and that was Like a River Glorious by Ray Carson. This is the sequel to the Walk on Earth as Stranger trilogy, which is a YA historical fantasy-ish trilogy based on the gold rush era. Our main character actually has the ability to sense gold, which should create a lot of fortune for her, but actually ends up creating a lot of problems. I do like our characters a lot. I just think that the plot really suffers. There were annoying instances that were put in place specifically just to keep the two like the love interests apart. My biggest complaint about this book is that it suffers from a lot of redundancies. A lot of the plot of the second book we've already seen in the first one. There also was a great deal of privilege, and privilege not being discussed or checked really enough. Most of our main characters are white, with the exception of the love interest being half Native American, but so much stuff is said, and although it looks like Ray Carson is attempting to check the privilege of our main white characters, it just comes across as a story of like the good whites, similarly to The Help. I think would be the best example. I also managed to predict the ending / climactic moment. It was not very subtly done in this story. I do think I will finish off the trilogy, mainly because these audiobooks are narrated fantastically. I gave it 2.5 of 5 stars. It's an okay series. I think it's perfectly fine. It's just lacking a lot of substance with its plot, and I do genuinely enjoy it though for the characters when they're not being idiots. The next book I read and adored was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is an incredibly popular adult sci-fi novel based around the inhabitants on the ship called the Wayfarer. They basically have to make this incredibly long trip across the galaxy, and this book is just focused on them, the characters, going through this very long, difficult journey. It's 100% a character-driven novel. There's very little plot in the story. It is a wonderfully diverse novel featuring an FF romance, which nobody ever mentions on BookTube. I've never heard that there's a female-female romance in here. And there are also characters that use they-them pronouns. It's an incredibly ambitious and very well thought out sci-fi novel. I don't know what else to say about this book that hasn't already been said. I agree with every great review of this book. At least for me, it really, really lived up to the hype. I gave it 5 of 5 stars. A very quiet, slow-paced sci-fi was just right what I needed and wanted, and it was just so great. The next book I read I also adored, but for entirely different reasons, and it is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. Basically, global warming is happening and the world isn't prepared for it, and it kind of falls into anarchy. At the start of our novel, I believe our protagonist is like 14, 15, and it follows her growing up in this world where laws don't exist. And at the time of all this strife, she also is realizing that she doesn't believe in the same God as her father does, and she actually is struck by this own religion of hers, and she's developing it. This is an incredibly powerful, brutal punch of a novel. It is incredibly difficult to read. I would give trigger warnings for assault and rape. I thought it was really unique and interesting to watch this story and the apocalyptic nature unfold. I also loved our main character, Lauren. It was incredibly refreshing to see a very mature and strong and practical young female character. I also forgot to mention that our main character, Lauren, and her whole family is Black, and Octavia E. Butler is famous for being the first Black female science fiction writer, and she's incredibly popular and well discussed. It's quite interesting reading this, knowing it was published in like 1993, but has so much relevance in the current political climate of the United States. It's very interesting, although terrifying, and Octavia E. Butler was a fantastic writer, and I can't wait to read more of her stuff. I just thought this book was so good, but so very, very, very difficult to get through at times. I read this on my breaks at work, which I don't personally recommend, but I do recommend you pick up this book. I gave Parable of the Sower 5 of 5 stars. And the final book I read in June was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. The Last Time I Lied is about a woman who, when she was attending summer camp 15 years ago, all of her bunkmates went missing, and she is then given the opportunity to go back to the same camp, and she decides that she's going to investigate and attempt to solve why these girls went missing. I actually did a full review for this, so I will leave it linked somewhere, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. Thought it was enjoyable, but not very memorable. I read it within a few sittings, and I think it's a perfect summery, beachy mystery to read. I found myself really wanting to have the mystery solved, but our main character, I think, was incredibly underdeveloped. It was an okay read. I'm pretty new to mysteries, thrillers as a genre, so I'm still kind of getting used to the tropes and the way things are done, but I enjoyed my time while reading it. It just wasn't like the greatest thing I've ever read, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So that's it for all the books I read in June. I cannot believe that I gave half of the things I read in June 5 stars. Maybe it's finally a break with the bad reading slump, not slump, but poor reading choices. I'm incredibly happy to have read all these very great books, and I would love to know what your favorite book you read in June was, so please let me know down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!